Welcome everybody to today's power luncheon. This is the BusinessWorks. But crisis, what crisis? How to keep your business from being caught by surprise. And I'm not sure that there is many businesses out there that haven't looked at this whole past year as being a crisis. I mean, unless you've been in the real estate industry, which is still continuing to boom, the hospitality industry certainly has been in a crisis mode. Today we have Valerie Franco and Chris Ahearn, and they're going to be sharing what your business can do to avoid a crisis. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Valerie.
All right, thank you, Bill. I'd like to start off, if you all weren't able to hear earlier, we're going to do some polling throughout this. We'd love to have the audience participate. So you can, on your phone, put in 22333 and then Valerie Frank 620, or you can go online at the website there to participate in the polling.
Great. Well, this is Valerie Franco. I'm Chris Ahearn, and together we are Anticipate Crisis Strategies. So we want this to be interactive. So raise your hand or put a little note in the chat if you have been through a major crisis in the last year. Right, exactly. So raise your hand if you have been through a crisis that was not COVID related. All right, raise your hand if you're ready to learn how to tackle your next crisis. Awesome. In the next few minutes, we look forward to sharing with you kind of the key tenets of putting together a crisis management plan. We want the session to be interactive. So as Valerie said, please log on to Poll Everywhere, either by texting on your phone or by going to the website that you see on the screen there. And we'll also save plenty of time to answer any questions that you have at the end of the presentation as well. So with that, we will get started.
Yeah. So how we define a crisis is different for every organization. What is a major crisis for some organizations may only be a small emergency for another organization. It has to do with perhaps how many days you're out of business, how long your facility may be down. It could have to do with media coverage and how long you're in the news cycle. So there are lots of different criteria, and it's different based on different businesses. But we're interested in what brings you to our session today. So. No, we're not. Our slide is not advancing. It's not We already have a small crisis. There we go.
Hopefully a minor.
All right. So we're very interested in what brings you to the session today and what piques your interest about crisis. So the choices are: my organization was not prepared for the pandemic or any other recent crisis. My company's facing a specific crisis. I'm responsible within my organization. I'd like to initiate a response program, or I'm interested in this topic and want to learn more, or something else. So if you want to respond now on the Poll Everywhere app, we'll see what brings everyone to join us today. Hope it's working. And here we go. If anyone would like to add color to their response, we're open to that as well. You know, there are so many reasons that companies begin a crisis program. Sometimes it's because the organization has been through a difficult time. It may also be that you see a competitor or someone in your space. I know when Target had that major data breach several years ago, the rest of us in retail were very concerned and definitely thinking about, oh, what if that was us? So, all right. We'll keep moving forward. I don't know that we got all the responses, but so as Chris said, I'm Valerie Franco, and my background is in claims and risk management. I often say that I have this risk brain that causes me, from all this experience, to think about what can go wrong, what may be coming down the pike, and different ways to respond to that. After that, almost 3 decades in risk and insurance, I'm now doing coaching of leaders and executives for resilience. And I'm also so happy this brought me to the partnership with Chris to work with her again to help companies prepare for crisis.
Valerie and I actually co-led the crisis management team for a major retailer for almost a decade. So we have a lot of big business experience that we think can be really relevant to mid and small businesses as well. I come to this with 30 years of crisis and corporate communication as my background in retail and healthcare, as well as a few years as a television news reporter as well, covering the crisis instead of having to deal with them. I also spent 2 years as CEO of our town's Habitat for Humanity, which in itself is kind of a small business. Most of my career has really been based on reputation management, and that's part of what crisis management is about. So Valerie and I started Anticipate Crisis Strategies because we know what a crisis can do to a business, the impact that it can have. It can temporarily derail your operations, and it can hurt your reputation, maybe in the short term, maybe forever. So it's important that you know how to deal with it and make sure that you respond as well as you can when something negative does happen to your company. Crisis by its very nature is stressful. As we all know, the stakes are high, but if you do have an effective strategy, you can emerge stronger after a crisis, perhaps stronger than you were before the crisis ever happened. So crises can be big or small, and they can happen anywhere at any time. You know, it might be a data breach or ransomware. I think we're seeing more and more technical crises happen, and crime-related crises with technology, particularly as we've been working from home for the last year. Companies are having to really think about how they're preserving that data when everybody's not in an office. Fire, destruction of property, a pandemic, of course. Active shooter is something that is very frightening, but something that we can prepare for as much as possible to respond appropriately. It might be a social media crisis. It could be a product issue. Or, you know, if you are a business that you are making deliveries or doing installation, there are traffic accidents that can be fatal and really a major crisis for your business. So, you know, a few things. We heard about the King Super shooting in Boulder, Colorado last week, which is just terrifying and a real tragedy, and looking at the way that organization and law enforcement has been dealing with that crisis. If we think back just a couple of months, you may be familiar with Boston Market. They were taking Thanksgiving orders, which during the pandemic, people, you know, may wanted to do takeout for Thanksgiving. Well, unfortunately, they took in more orders than they could handle around the country, and all around the country, they had people showing up to pick up their Thanksgiving dinner for their family. They weren't there, they weren't cooked, people were waiting in lines, unmasked for hours to get their food, and then some people didn't get it at all. So the crisis happens. How did they handle it? Did they apologize? No. They kept their social media going, promoting this great Thanksgiving promotion. Well, if you were one of those people who either ordered your Thanksgiving dinner or read about it or saw it on the news, it hurts the trust that you would have in that company. And so are you going to order from them again? You're probably going to think twice about it. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. So again, it's not only the crisis itself, but it's how you respond to the crisis that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. So today we want to share with you 5 things you need to know before the crisis. And I'll just read them off here and then we'll jump right in. The first one is commit to planning. Next is identify your most likely risk. Draft your dream team. craft your plan, then practice, practice, practice.
Can't say that practice thing enough. I
That's
promise
right.
you. So committing to planning, that is the really important thing. This is a commitment that you're making to your organization. So you need to start before you're in crisis mode, because if you wait till you are in the middle of a crisis to start from scratch, that is a terrible time to work on a crisis plan. It's important as you're thinking about committing to crisis planning for your organization, who needs to make that commitment? It's leadership of the company, but it's also the people who are going to be working on the plan itself. So commitment is time for a lot of people. And who's got the time to really do this right and to be there in the moment managing the issue? People are busy, so you may not want to choose the busiest person in your organization, but whoever you do choose doesn't have to be the owner of your organization. It may or may not be a senior executive, but it needs to be somebody who is, very responsible and diligent and has access to the decision makers in the moment. So that's an important consideration as you're committing to planning. So think about who the key person in your organization would be to be that leader of your crisis team and the person who you would really need to get commitment from. The other thing you're thinking about when you're committing to planning is the culture of your organization. Companies and nonprofits work differently. Some have a real top-down organization. Some are very collaborative and more of a matrix where a lot of people are involved in making those decisions, those tough decisions. So you need to think about how communication flows in your organization and how your team works together as you're thinking about who needs to be part of that team and how we're going to commit to planning. So we'll have a few action items for you throughout this presentation. So your action item number 1 for committing to planning is to block time on your calendar, even if it's just an hour, to figure out how you're going to commit and who needs to commit to be part of creating this crisis plan. So, what's on the calendar often gets done. So book that time on your calendar. That's action item number 1.
Absolutely. The second piece is identifying your most likely risk. And you may say, well, the unexpected also happens, and it absolutely does. But when we plan for what is most likely to happen, that gives us that rhythm. It allows us to formalize the plan, and then those practices can be applied to other things. Now, certain things are somewhat intuitive. If we are manufacturers, there can be fires, or retail organizations have had data breaches, so we know that. Restaurants and grocery stores have foodborne illness. And certainly everyone is subject to natural disasters, hurricane, tornado, earthquake, and apparently pandemics. Almost everyone is susceptible to. So as you think about what is most important for your organization to move forward, it's important to think about what can stop us in our tracks. And as you begin your journey of crisis planning, that's a great place to start. And as I said, the practices you develop will translate to those unexpected things as well. So we are very curious about what keeps you up at night. So this will be our next poll. And in this one, if you'll just type in either one word, or if it's 2 words, don't put a space in so that it stays together. But what is that one word description of what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about in your organization?
It's really interesting when you start thinking about what keeps you up at night. And when Valerie and I first met, when she joined the company, that was one of the questions that I asked her, and the response she gave was something completely different than anything I had ever thought of. And it really made me think a little harder. Valerie headed up risk management for Lowe's. I headed up corporate communication. And the thing that kept her up at night was the West Coast and California, and the regulation and the fires and, you know, the other issues that happen often far, far away from where you are. That had not been something that even crossed my mind. But as I started thinking about it, then we were able to make some plans for earthquakes and wildfires and even regulation that the state would impose on businesses. Yeah, so hopefully the polling is working for you.
And for those on Zoom, if you would like to use the chat, we welcome that as well, because we're interested, and it may not be working, so we will just go forward. But before we leave this topic, your action item for identifying risk is to make that list, that very short list of the 2 to 3 things that you are most concerned about in your organization. All right. Next is drafting the team. The team that works on the crisis is so important. And I will tell you this. You don't want to be getting to know someone for the first time in the midst of a crisis. That is not the time to figure out, how does this person communicate? What is their style? So just the act of spending time together and getting to know the scope that different people have, how they communicate, how they operate is very valuable. And beyond that, what you want on your team are people that can find resolutions together, that can disagree with one another and still move forward. We'll talk more about resilient personalities. Also, don't forget about people outside of your organization, especially with smaller companies and even large companies as well. The partners are very important. So think about your insurance broker or agent, your public relations and marketing partners. Also in the community, do you have a relationship with local law enforcement? Do you have a relationship with the fire department or the medical facility that's closest to you? It's so eye-opening to sit down with individuals and learn what their protocols are. So for example, if there were an incident of workplace violence at your company, how are the police going to respond? And after the fact, are they going to talk to the media, you know, and who's in charge, so to speak? So all of those things, if you can build those relationships early, you're going to be way ahead. And the other thing to think about is invariably, and we have lived this, every time something happens, a key person is missing. They're on vacation out of the country, or they are on a major business trip, but that person that you knew you were going to count on is not there. So you always need a strong second string, a backup group that is trained and is part of the collective. And the other thing to remember is not everybody can be in the crisis. Somebody needs to run your business. So who is definitely not on the team is an important thing that you want to think about. And we also talked about resilience and what makes a resilient team member. This is where it's important to look at the personalities and the traits of the individuals. As we've seen for the past year, crises last on and on and on. This is not a one-day event, almost never. It can go on for weeks and months. And that requires a personality that can remain calm over time, that can deal with the stress of it, that knows when to raise their hand and say, I need to take a break. I need for the second string to come in for a little bit. So these are the people you want on your team, are those cool heads under fire. And as I mentioned before, individuals who can have tough conversations, can have disagreement. Finding the best solution means bringing everything to the table and debating that. So you want to have those personalities that can definitely do that and then walk away aligned and united with the group. So that's a tall ask, but that's another important thing to think about. as you put your dream team together. So your homework for drafting your team is to think in your mind, who are those 3 to 5 people that would really be at the core and in the lead for our crisis response.
And they need to be people who have courage too,
For
you
sure.
know, who can speak truth to power, because sometimes you're in a crisis, and we've been in a few where, you know, the attorneys or others will say, oh, well, we're, you know, nobody's going to ask that. We're not answering that question. Well, the question's going to get asked, and you can either prepare for it or not, but, you know, you can't control everything that comes in. And so, you know, being able to stand up and state your case about why, you know, why we need to be prepared for this, or why we need to have an answer for that, is really important. And also just thinking about resilient teams as well. They're going to, you know, you're going to have differing opinions on the team. If the team decides to go left and you wanted to go right, you need to be able to carry the flag and go left with everybody else, you know, once that decision has been made. And I think that, you know, that's part of those resilient skills that, you know, you can learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And that's a very important point.
Okay. All right. So when you are, the next step after you've kind of committed to doing a plan, you have drafted your dream team, then you start to craft your plan. So let's try this poll one more time. See if it's going to work.
Yeah.
So your polling question is, you know, my organization has a plan that works, has a plan, but it's outdated, has a plan, but nobody follows through when the going gets tough, or what's a plan? See if it'll work this time. For the folks in the room, is it working, or is it being wonky?
Not for me.
Not so well.
I do get a response that says.
Okay. Right. We're all learning new technology in this extended crisis. There we go.
I get the notice that I'm participating.
Oh,
And Sarah
excellent.
has a
Sarah
thing.
says outdated plan.
Yeah.
A lot of those around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really one of the challenges that all kinds of organizations face, is a plan, but it's not current.
And at least it's a start. So that's the good
Right.
news.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyone else want to just say where they are with it?
Well, the polling says you can no longer respond to this activity as well.
Well, there we go.
Oh, my goodness.
But I would say ours probably needs to be updated.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very common.
Yeah, it really is an ongoing process
Yes.
to keep it going.
Yeah. So, you know, once you know who's on your team, you know, who can work together, you've got to start crafting your plan. And every member of the team, once you decide who that is, should feel like they own the plan. You know, you own what you help create. So that really helps people have that buy-in, which is really important. And so when Valerie and I think about a crisis strategy, we think about a living document that changes as your organization changes and as the environment around you changes. So, you know, that's important. You know, we've learned, I learned when I was at Habitat for Humanity, for example, that, you know, having a plan and keeping it updated sometimes felt like a luxury, because you're so busy in a small organization. I think we had 53 or 4 employees at the time. There's so much to do day to day, and it's hard to take that time out to do what you need to do for the long-term health of your organization. So the calendar can really be your friend here. If you just block that time, that couple of hours or that half a day to get with your team, you can consider it, you know, sort of an investment in your business. So talking about dynamic plans, this should not be just another notebook that gathers dust on your shelf. You know, I have had a lot of dusty notebooks in my time. It does need to be written down though, because if it lives in your head, no matter how great the plan is in your head, if people don't know about it, you might as well not have a plan. So your plan also should be accessible to you 24/7. Now, some people like to have their notebook at work and then they'll have a notebook at home. I like to save mine on my iPad and my phone, because no matter where I was, if I was at the beach, I still had my plan, my to-dos and my plan, And I also had my contact list of everybody I needed to notify to get the team together to work on that plan. So it's got to be dynamic and it's got to be accessible to you. Each member of the team needs to understand his or her role and be willing to trust the process that you've agreed on when things happen. I've seen a lot of instances where you have a plan, your team members are trained, and everybody understands the process, and then the crisis happens and you forget all of it and all go running off in your own direction. It's human nature. It just happens. So it's really important that everybody who is part of your team commits that when something happens, we're going to follow the plans that we have drafted, and we will be flexible where we need to be flexible. So once you have your plan, you've got your team, everybody's trained, you've got to share your plan so that others in your organization know what it is and how to contact you or other team members if something happens. If people don't know you have a plan, they'll assume that you don't, and then they'll work in their own way, which might be counter to the plan that you have. So your action item for this one is, if you have a plan, make a commitment to read through it and see what it looks like. Identify if you have processes in your plan that are no longer relevant and need to be changed, or if you have team members who are part of executing a plan and maybe you've had turnover in your organization and you need to update your contact list as well. If you don't have a plan at all, I would commit to starting the conversation. Make that be your action item. Whether it's a nonprofit board or the leadership in your organization, commit to having the conversation about the importance of having a plan and maybe the concerns that you have that could be risks for your company.
Definitely. I think Steve made a comment that sets us up perfectly.
Oops, did I miss it? That's all right. Nope, I think we're back there. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So once you are working on your plan, there are a few things that are kind of a part of any plan, no matter what your organization is like. First of all, you have to define what a crisis means to your organization. So something that might be a crisis for one organization would be every day doing business for another one. I think about hurricanes. If you think about a big logistics company like a Walmart or a Target or a Lowe's or a Home Depot, they deal with hurricanes all the time, and they've got processes to watch that storm coming and make sure that they get the products where they need to be on time, right? That restaurant that gets flooded and put out of business because of the storm surge may or may not have a plan to recover quickly. So you got to think about, is it a crisis for you? It might not be a crisis for somebody else. As part of your plan and drafting your team, you're going to figure out who that leader is, who is going to be responsible for keeping your plan fresh and for pulling people together when you do have a crisis. You need to think about logistics. What if you can't get into your business? What if you can't get into your office? Well, I think we all have some experience with that this year, so that might be less of an issue. But if your IT system blows up, what are you going to do? What is your backup? Where are you going to meet? Or what is your backup for getting other technology up and running so that you can keep your business going while you're dealing with the crisis? Think about your decision-making process. What decisions can the team make on its own if it's maybe a smaller crisis, and what decisions have to be elevated to either your senior leadership or your company owner? Who can make which decisions? And it's really important to document your activities. If it's, for example, we talked about an auto accident, your delivery truck hits a school bus. There might be legal implications if there were injuries. So you're going to want to think about documenting the decisions that you make along the way, because there might be legal implications for your business, and that way you will be better able to answer those questions, defend your organization. And also you want to include in your process time to evaluate how well you did after it's over. Because you can learn from every single incident that happens, And if you take that time to do, just a little post-mortem on your crisis, you can say, what did we do really well? What are ways that we can improve, and where do we need extra help? So if you look at this list, there's one thing that you will not see on this list. Any guesses for the folks in the room? What's not on the list? What's not on the list that we think is really important is blame. There is no time for blame in the middle of a crisis. When you've got something happening, you should be looking at how do we fix it? And after it's over, or after you're well along in fixing it, then you can say, how did this happen? Were there individuals involved that we, might need to change the way we do things, or there are processes that need to change? But in the heat of the moment, if you were spending time looking at whose fault this was, you are going to be wasting your time. And time is so valuable when you're on the hot seat.
Yeah. That's such human nature. It's hard to
It
overcome
is.
that, but it is important. Yeah. All right. So I think Steve had a comment that teased us up perfectly about practice. And for me, I always enjoyed this, and it really stressed me out at the same time. Because what does practice mean? How do you practice for a crisis? Well, you simulate, and often you sit around tables just like this, and someone will say, this just happened. This bad thing just happened. And you talk about, what would you do? Then what would you do next? And oh, by the way, 2 hours later, this happens, so it evolves just as a real crisis would. And the team is able to sit together and say, oh, well, my thought is we would go down this path, and others would say, oh, but what about this happening? So it really is a simulation. It can be anything from of the things we've talked about, loss of a facility. Perhaps a leader is incapacitated. And so you not only have to communicate internally and figure out how to run your business, but you have to tell something to the public about that, right? The types of things you can exercise, ransomware. Large and small companies, unfortunately, are being hit with ransomware. Do you pay and move on? Do you not pay and risk whatever the threat is, whether it's exposure to data, shutting down your business? That's a tough one. And what law enforcement do you engage? So they're definitely, if I'm not mistaken, the FBI wants to know about those situations. So figuring all of that out in the moment is not going to be ideal.
I believe the city of Charlotte had a ransomware situation a couple of years ago,
I think that's right.
and they wound up just paying a whole lot of money because that's the only way they could really get out of it.
It's such a difficult decision. And sometimes the request for the payment is in virtual Bitcoin or virtual payment. And if you don't have that set up, then that's another hurdle during the crisis. So I can't say enough about the value you'll gain from practicing. In every practice session I've been in, there have been questions that stump the group, where everybody sort of goes, oh, we don't know, and I definitely, and I don't know if it's the same for you, Chris, but when I'm in those sessions, I physically can feel my heart rate going up and kind of getting hot with the stress of thinking about how this scenario would be in real life. So it's so valuable. Here's something also to know. And it's just, there have been many studies. I've experienced this both in claims and crisis work. Know that your initial information is often incorrect. There's lots of reasons why neurologically even eyewitnesses get information wrong. But when information is coming in fast and you're trying to sort out what's happening, take a breath and start to verify. Get more than one account. Go back, look for yourself, whatever is needed to make sure that the decisions you're making are based on fact and truth. It's huge. So just a couple of examples. This one is not actually from a simulation, but in reality, I'm sure you all remember what's termed the Miracle on the Hudson, the airplane that crashed in the Hudson, and fortunately everyone survived. It was coming to Charlotte. And so some local businesses got calls from the media of, did you have any leaders on that plane? Before they knew everyone was okay, did you have people on there? So things you can put in place are like tracking travel, knowing where especially your leaders are. I also recall a major, don't know if it was an attack or just a fire in Bangalore, India. And there were employees in India at the time, and we didn't know if our employees were staying at that place or not. So tracking travel is one thing that can really be helpful. Another thing is documenting, practicing, or figuring out how you're going to document. Chris mentioned the importance of keeping up with things, but in a crisis, as information is coming in fast and furious, decisions are being made, steps are being taken, it's important for someone to be responsible for all of those things. For what is the fact? How was it verified? What action has been taken? Has the response been done? Just that one piece is easy to forget and is going to really help to bring order to the chaos.
And sometimes that person can be a really strong administrative assistant. It could be, a legal assistant or somebody in your organization who is really detail oriented, who can kind of keep track all along the way. It doesn't have to be a major decision maker. It's probably better if it isn't. But that way, your team is working on your plan and trying to execute the plan in the moment. But you've got somebody saying that, okay, on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we decided to do, to go down this path, or we contacted law enforcement at this time. And, we made these decisions along the way. And that way you're not relying on your memory, and it's part of protecting your company by having great documentation. And it's also part of how you learn and can do a good postmortem at the end. Mm-hmm. So think of somebody really organized and confidential.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. And just one other thing that I want to stress is that unfortunately, crises don't happen in a vacuum. So as we've seen in the last year, there was a pandemic happening while there was also social unrest. You may have a cyber issue happening and payroll is due the next day. So can you pay your employees? So when you're simulating crisis, a real key is to have someone who's not part of your team to craft the crisis for you. So you don't know what's coming and you get a few curveballs in there, and that will really help you exercise those muscles of finding solutions, having that debate back and forth, asking those questions of, oh, who does that? Oh, how does that work? So better to do it in that safe room of tables and imagination. And your action item is to give it a try. If you've never done an exercise, you can create a simple exercise, spend a couple of hours just to see what it feels like. So I would say give it a shot. All right. So we're back to the 5 things, and I'll just quickly review the action items. For planning, we want to just put some time on the calendar. Just start getting in the habit of taking a bit of time, whatever that looks like for you. For identifying risk, we want to come up with those top 3 items that we believe are our most likely risk for our organization. For crafting the team, go ahead and choose, if you don't already know who this will be, 3 to 5 people to start working with and talking to about your crisis response. For crafting the plan, either get started or take that dusty plan off the shelf and revisit it. And finally, for practice, schedule that desktop session. Just try a small one to get you going. So
It's amazing what you learn.
it is.
You'll think you'll have perfect plans in place, and then somebody will throw a monkey wrench at you, and then then you're back to the drawing board a little bit. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's so valuable.
Yeah. I remember an exercise where, in the simulation, leaders were lost due to violence. And this is the sort of thing for any company that would be on the news and so forth. And within the organization, it wasn't clear how the families would be notified, who would do that. And so those are the kind of really important human decisions that it's so much better if you've thought about it ahead of time, because a crisis has the potential to change people's lives and organizations permanently. So the better prepared we are, the less harm that can be done potentially, right? Okay, so we really would love to know what's been eye-opening for you all. What has anyone had sort of that aha moment of, I never thought of that? Share in the chat or for those here. Right.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the pandemic is just truly it was out of the left field for everybody. But I think all the misinformation and all that was going on was really the most difficult thing for businesses and just the population, between the governor, the Fed. I mean, it was just, it took so long for things to get any sort of focus. That was tough about it.
Well, and I think, misinformation, because, you've got conspiracy theories online, and just incomplete information or conflicting information as the government's trying to figure out what to do and healthcare leaders are trying to figure out how to advise us. That's, part of that's part of the crisis. Not having complete information, or as Valerie said, the first information you have is not likely to be completely right. So that's one of the challenges that practicing with a tabletop exercise will help you figure out, okay, if we don't have good information or the information changes, how does that change the way we react as an organization? So that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. And I see Sarah. I can definitely understand the difficulty of convincing the team to practice. And one way to go about that may be to think about what's at risk and how practicing may be able to save your organization from the standpoint of, it could be financial savings, it could be life and health savings. So reputation, even the future of an organization, how companies respond to crisis often either builds them up and makes them stronger going forward, or it can be the beginning of the end. And so perhaps just, considering the benefits versus the risk.
And, while consumers vote with their wallets every day and decide where to shop based partly on your reputation, nonprofit organizations, donors are voting with their wallets as well. And so reputation is everything with a nonprofit organization, because there's so many choices and so many ways for people to share and try and help the community. So that practice would probably help make a good case for that, because it really will. And I think sometimes it is a matter of time for people, and people saying, oh, I'm way too busy to do that right now, whether you're for-profit or a nonprofit organization. But I find that if it's on my calendar, it gets done. So I can block a couple of hours on the calendar, and then it doesn't seem as insurmountable as if it's like, oh my gosh, I just have to find 2 hours. If it's just on the calendar 3 weeks from now, it just happens. So maybe you can use your calendar as a tool in that way.
Yeah. All right. We're curious about how prepared organizations feel that they are on a scale of 1 to 10, and we're going to pretend that this is going to work even though it may not. But also, if you'd like to put your number from 1 to 10 in the chat or try the polling, we're just curious to know the level of preparedness that each one feels that they have. Oh.
Oh, now it's going to work.
I received the same message that Bill got. I can no longer respond. It was limited to one response.
Okay, so we clearly need to work on polling technology.
Yeah.
That is our lesson learned from today,
Yeah.
is polling technology.
Of course,
So,
postmortem is change venues.
well, if you score yourself a 7 or below, we can help you. It looks like we got a lot of 6s there, for sure. Valerie and I are happy to come on site and brainstorm with you and work shoulder to shoulder with your organization. You know, we also, you know, can do so much of that remotely, whatever your organization is most comfortable with. And we can, you know, help walk your team through, you know, a lot of what we talked about today and why this is important and how you can get started. Because there are crises, as you think about what keeps you up at night, that you can anticipate. And then there are things that are going to come completely out of left field, for sure. So, you know, whether you're creating a new crisis strategy or whether you are dusting off your existing plan, you know, if you want to do a tabletop exercise and kind of rate your organization and see where you are, we can help you and your team be more successful in anticipating crisis. We also bring expertise and coaching, both from the resilience perspective as well as strong communications. So we have that as well. We would love to open it up for questions if we are still good on time, and you can just unmute yourself if you would like. And also questions from the room. We want to be sure that we're answering the things that are hot in your mind.
Steve, I saw your note about how many companies even have fire drills. And that's
great.
something that you know can happen.
Surprised.
Yeah.
You know, my wife, she works at a school, but it's, you know, they have to have them, but a lot of private businesses. In fact, a lot of them just don't even know where to turn the water off.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
I mean, if we had a water break in this building, Bill, would you know, and you were the only one here, would you know how to turn the water off? Maybe.
Yes,
Okay,
the water is out front. I've seen
Okay.
it.
I'm not sure I can tell you where to do it at my house.
But in that,
Any questions from the room or questions from the Zoom? Hi, Sarah.
Hi there. Good to see you guys. I have a quick, well, I don't know if it's a question, maybe just elaboration a little bit from you guys who are the experts. My organization, because we help kids and families, we're really prepared in terms of crisis for a lot of different things. What worries me specifically is reputation crisis. Speak to that for a minute and how you manage, I don't know, it's not manage leadership, or you get convinced leadership that that is important too, and that we need to practice things like that, or what's our first steps?
Yeah, that's where communication is just so important, because it's how you're managing that crisis. So I'm sure that, you know, if something happened with a child in your care, you guys would just be all over it and be best in class, no doubt. But how is that communicated on social media? What are people who only have half the facts going to say about your organization? And that's where you really need a strong communication plan that dovetails with your crisis plan, so that you're communicating internally with your own staff so that they can be ambassadors for you. You're communicating with your donors and other stakeholders in a timely way, and with regulators who would be overseeing your organization's operations. And I think where you're talking about reputation, you really have to be proactive and make sure that you have everybody on the same page and that you're all telling the same story about how you have handled the crisis well. And then I think you have to follow up over time also, because sometimes people may not pay attention in the moment, but 3 or 4 or 6 months from now, when somebody talks about your organization, they'll say, oh, I think I heard something about that. Didn't they mess up with X, Y, and Z? So it's really ongoing, making sure that you've got strong proactive communication in the good days, and then you will actually get some of the benefit of the doubt when you are under pressure and have a day that's not so good. But there is some good research out there about reputation and you know, how much it can impact a business, and certainly with nonprofit, impact donors' desire to contribute. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Any others? Well, we are probably running close to time.
We are, but thank you so very much. We want to thank Valerie and Chris for being here today at the BusinessWorks. And that concludes the program. It's going to be, we did record it.
Okay.
So we will put this on the website and send it out in our social media. So if you didn't take good notes and you still want to have good notes, it's going to be sent out later on today.
Fantastic.
And
Thank
we
you
want
so
to thank
much.
both of you ladies.
Yeah, thank you very much.